Another wonderful use of the Too Cool style is to make a clothing quilt. Most of the clothing quilts we get are actually memorial quilts. They're being made with clothing from somebody who has died. As a quilt maker, you need to be aware of this because your customer has just experienced a really large loss in their life and they might be a little bit more difficult to work with. You can use almost any type of clothing in a memorial quilt. In this quilt here, we've used a bathrobe, a pair of pants with the back pocket, a shirt, khakis, zippers, buttons, even sheepskin. I try to use everything that my customers send to me, at least one small piece. One issue you will have is if an item is dry clean only. You can use that item in a quilt, but then the entire quilt becomes dry clean only. I always check with my customers to make sure that this will be okay, because if a quilt's not dry cleaned, down the line, let's say in 20 years, the quilt will be ruined. Double check with your customer if there's a dry clean only item. Unlike a t-shirt quilt, a clothing quilt can be made into any size. If you have a few items and you want to make a big quilt, you're going to cut more from each item and each item will use bigger blocks. If you want to make a small quilt from a lot of shirts and clothing and pants, you're going to use smaller blocks from each. When we begin cutting a memorial quilt, we always start with a new trash bag. We put all the scraps from this quilt into the bag. That way, if we need more, they'll be here and available. Also, some of our customers want their scraps back, and this way we can have them segregated. If your customer wants their scraps back, you can do it one of two ways. If you don't have a lot of storage room, I would send the scraps back right after you're ready to start sewing the quilt top. If you have a lot of room, you can simply put the bag of scraps aside. Then when you mail the quilt back, you can simply add the scraps to the box. Cutting a memorial quilt is very similar to cutting any other t-shirt quilt you've made. There are some odds and ends that you're going to find and figure out how to do. Let's look at a couple of them that I've found and figured out how to do real easily. First is a pair of blue jeans. There's a couple things you need to be aware of when you cut blue jeans. First, the pockets are really hard and there's these rivets that you want to avoid. You want to avoid the thick seams. So I'm going to line up my template so it's below the seam and it doesn't land on a rivet or on an edge of a pocket. All right, that was a really thick seam I just cut through. So I'm going to grab my scissors and I'm going to finish it up with my scissors. So there's a blue jean block. How about a sock? Have you used a sock before? This is how I use them. I first grab a backing piece of material. It does not matter what color it is. You can use any different color you want. I'm going to grab a fairly small one. Then I grab my sock, and I know it's going to be a 4x4 because it's fairly small. So I'm going to cut below, and then I'm going to cut down the back on the opposite side with my scissors. Then when I open them up, I have plenty of fabric. But I'm going to spray glue him to another piece of fabric first so he's more stable and not so stretchy, because this is very stretchy. So I get my spray glue out. Give him a little spray. Put them on the backing piece, and then simply cut them out. And so that's how you use a sock. How about a pair of boxer shorts, hot pants? Well, I need to think about what part I want to use on this. And I've got a seam here, I've got a seam here, and a seam here. I want to get a part which does not have a seam. And I could also use the fly, but to me there's nothing interesting on the fly, so I'm just going to choose a piece from the back. So simply, I'm just going to slip this in half, and then I can open it up. Next, I want to remove the elastic. If I don't remove the elastic, I'm going to have a lot of ruffles here. Without the elastic, it opens up really nice. I I can do that. Perfect. Just the right amount of room. That's how I cut out a pair of boxer shorts. This is a really, really stretchy shirt. So I'm going to need to use the same method I did with the sock. So I'm going to figure out what part of this shirt I want to use first. And I want to use the buttons, definitely. So I'm going to button her up. And then I'm going to look at how I want to use this. I think I want to use it just like that. So I'm going to give myself extra space around here. This piece will go in the garbage. If we need it later, it'll be there. All right, so now I need to have a piece of backing for this. So I'm simply going to choose a color that I like. This is just t-shirt material. Then I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to spray the back of it. Sometimes, if it's really stretchy and difficult to work with, we found that it helps to have two people doing the gluing and the putting down onto the other piece of material. Next, I grab my template, I lay it over it, and I cut it out. Now it's nice and stable, it's not going to stretch on me. It's perfect to use in a memorial quilt. One of the things you need to remember when you're cutting is you may not remember what's up and down and inside and out on a piece of clothing. So when you're cutting, you need to make sure you indicate that. So like on this shirt, I'm going to cut just a simple 8x4. So this piece will get put into my box. Well, is this an 8x4? A 4x8? Is this the front, the back? You might not remember. Probably won't remember. It happens. So what I do is I grab a pin and I simply put a pin within the seam allowance at the top, and so just like this. And the little ball tells me that's the face side. So on the back, all you see is that. You know that's the back, and you know this is the front, and that's the top. By doing that, you're going to save yourself a lot of guesswork when you actually go down to sew. After you've cut each of your items, count and stack your blocks and figure out the size of your quilt, just like you would with a t-shirt quilt. If you're way too big, you go back and you cut your blocks down and make them smaller. If you're way too small, go back to your trash bag and start cutting some more. I found that if I'm about 400 or so square inches short, I actually will start making my map, and I leave open spaces on my map where I can go and cut other blocks later on. This way I know exactly what size and what shape those blocks can be. When you're coloring your map for your memorial quilts, one of the things you need to think about is how you're going to distinguish some pieces of fabric from others. So what we've done is we have made special extra markings on our map. So if it's a striped fabric, we'll just use little stripes. If it's a plaid, we kind of actually get 2 or 3 colors involved and make it plaid. It'll make it easier for you to put this quilt together if you have a little bit better sense of what fabric you're talking about in that particular square. Sewing a memorial quilt can be tricky. You are sewing together so many different types of fabrics that some are going to stretch and some are going to be really non-stretchy. For example, this blue jean, it does not stretch at all. This right here is a bathing suit. This stretches. You're going to have to really work to keep your seams nice and neat. Here is actually too narrow and it's too wide, so you need to pay attention and really measure your seams. Sewing this is going to be tricky, but you really want to pay attention and have it done right the first time. If you have to take a seam out, it's going to be very, very difficult. If you plan ahead, use your straight pins, I think you'll do very well. Sewing a stretchy piece of material to a non-stretchy is very difficult. The trick is to put the stretchy on the bottom and the non-stretchy on the top. If you need to, you could put a pin at the bottom. There you have it, the non-stretchy sewn to the stretchy. After your top has been sewed together, put a temporary binding on it just like you would a t-shirt quilt. Let's look at this memorial quilt and look at the different fabrics that we've used. So before you start quilting, move your machine over your quilt and see what happens. You want to be careful not to get this caught in your blue jean like that. This is not too bad over the sock. This is a big lump that I don't want to quilt over. So that's not too bad. I definitely don't want to go like this on these pleats because it'll sew them all up. So I really need to approach this one as a down. So just move your quilt machine over your quilt and see what happens. I want to watch this area because there's a pocket there and I want to have that pocket still usable. Once you've moved your machine over, then you can start quilting. You noticed as I went around this pocket that I kept away from the edge of the pocket so the presser foot didn't hit it. Okay, this is going to be a sock that I'm going to go over and it's going to be really thick, so I need to slow down. Okay, here are those pleats that I need to work down on. I use my left hand a lot as I'm quilting to make sure that everything is lined smooth and flat. When you quilt a memorial quilt, you're going to be using many of the same quilting patterns that you use on a regular quilt. You're just not going to be doing any of the tracing that you do on a regular t-shirt quilt.